There are a lot of different levels in Twisted Metal. Some are very memorable, stuff like Paris from Twisted Metal 2 or the construction yard from Twisted Metal 4, being simple yet enjoyable. Today we are going to look at the worst level from each and every game in the series. It will probably be easier than I expect to find them because no game has a perfect list of maps, so we will start with the first Twisted Metal game. Twisted Metal 1 suffers from a lack of variety in level design. Hell, Warehouse District is just a smaller version of River Park Rumble. Lots of people tend to go towards the arena saying it's the worst level in the game because it's really small. I don't think that level is perfect, but I don't think it's the worst either. The setup of Twisted Metal actually being a tournament and starting in a 1v1 is quite unique. To me, Highway Loop is the level at the bottom of the barrel. A part of me wanted to stick Suburbia here since I don't really like that level either. It's way too big for its own good. So many sections can be removed, which would make Suburbia flow so much better. Highway Loop is in the same vein, just a lot more boring and overly redundant in the visuals. You're essentially driving in a circle with a few cars laid out on the sides. Sure, they have some weapon pickups here and there, but it all just seems random. Obviously, the PlayStation 1 wasn't able to handle small AI cars driving around through the level while fighting. It would have been nice to see that, giving this level some more life. Maybe if they stuck some destroyed vehicles in the road or add some debris to add into the hey, you're in a tournament and people are dying aspect of Twisted Metal. Most of the time you just end up driving in a straight line for 10 to 15 seconds waiting to find an enemy. This issue becomes even worse when you bring the enemy count down to lower numbers. You're just driving and driving and driving since the AI is either staying away from you or touching itself on the corner of a map, forcing you to play a game of hide and seek to find them. I do like the inclusion of the secret health pickup under one of the cars, but overall I don't find Highway Loop to be enjoyable in comparison to any other levels in this game. There's so much downtime, and maybe if you just cut the level in half since you don't really need it to be a donut-ass level, add some debris and other things in the road as slight obstacles, being able to use them as ramming tools against your enemies, plus removing half of the donut would allow for more fast-paced action instead of a game of cat and mouse. Highway Loop, more like highway poop, right guys? Twisted Metal 2 has a good list of levels, probably the game's strongest suit. There was a lot of creativity in comparison to the first entry. The Eiffel Tower is referenced the most, but I feel like Antarctica is the most unique level in the game. The map falling apart over time was a very fun aspect, always keeping the player on their toes. When it comes to the worst map, that's pretty easy. Moscow takes that undoubtedly. Some will say Holland, which does smell quite bad, just not as bad as this. My biggest issue with Moscow is that there's barely any pickups, that being weapons or health, making it a really unnecessarily difficult second level for a lot of people. Sure, you can carry over weapons from the previous level, but for someone who doesn't know about this feature, what kind of punishment is that? They're stuck with using their machine gun or waiting for their specials to regenerate. There's only one health pickup as well, which seems to be a smaller one. I don't know the exact percentage, but you'd figure in a level that has one health pickup, it must be a full health considering there's only one, but obviously that's not the case. I like how you can destroy the signs for some cheat codes or blow up the bridges for a few extra things, but we need more initially visible. Just going off of what you get without carrying stuff over, it's not enough for the player to survive on their own. Sure, if you're using a broken disaster of a character like Axel, then absolutely, you'll be fine. Ramming with two big-ass wheels is a great tactic. With smaller cars, you'll inevitably run out of weapons and be stuck to either driving around waiting for something to spawn in or waiting for your special to regenerate, which seems to be a common theme for almost every worst level in Twisted Metal, ones who have a ridiculous amount of downtime or terrible weapon spawning. Maybe if Moscow was not the second level, an argument I've seen quite a bit that I could get behind, the player then would have enough time to figure out, oh, my weapons are transitioning between stages. Granted, it doesn't make Moscow a good level by any means, it would just fix the largest issue about it, or one of them at least. Moscow feels more like a deathmatch level that you play against one person rather than playing against 5 opponents. Plus, the level is all ramps, which exacerbates Twisted Metal 2's atrocious physics, which is always fun. I just hate this level, and I will never understand why I am forced to play on it. Twisted Metal 3 is filled with a lot of junk in the level department, or maybe not junk. I don't feel like many of the levels in Twisted Metal 3 are actually bad, they're just boring. There's nothing interesting about them. Some people may see that as bad, which I can see, but I view them as uninteresting, boring sleeper maps. They are playable for the most part, aside from one piece of shit. Egypt, as everyone knows, the physics of 3 are not very good. It takes a while to be able to handle the beast. The levels being so flat is a good and bad thing overall. It's good because it allows the players to control much easier than they otherwise would, and it's bad because they're not very interesting and quite boring to play with little creativity. From what I was told by Big Jim, the man who worked on this game, the levels were designed that way, being overly flat, is because of the AI's pathing, nothing to do with the physics, which I initially thought was the reason. Egypt is the only level that's riddled with all these humps around the level, which makes a lot of sense. You know, the sand dunes, pyramids, and other stuff like that lives in Egypt. The only problem is the hills create an issue with the physics. This level can become virtually unplayable at times due to how many bumps the car is driving over. If you want to traverse Egypt without flipping over, you are required to drive so slow, which is just not fun in any game. So players naturally go normal speeds, which creates a lot of frustrations of flipping over and just dealing with this nonsense. Playing this level with Sweet Tooth is practically impossible since the way his truck is shaped, you are flipping over constantly on flat grounds, so it becomes a challenge run of winning with Sweet Tooth without flipping over, being much worse on Egypt. This level is just not fun to play on, which is a shame because it had some cool features. The Pyramid Eye, the soundtrack is really good, being one of the few originals in 3. If you were able to play the game, Egypt wouldn't even be that bad. Bottom line, 3's physics and Egypt do not mix, creating one of the most annoying experiences possible in the entire series. Twisted Metal 4 has a strange mix of levels, some of the best in the series to me. I love the construction yard, the carnival is a very fun one as well. Then there are a few stinkers like Minions Maze and Road Rage. I'm not counting the bonus levels because they aren't designed to be replacements of the real tournament ones. The choice is obviously going to be made between both Road Rage and Minions Maze. Obviously before I was going to say Minions Maze because of how bad the layout is. There's a reason why most people just use an exploit on it since the level is just not fun to play on. Even the AI struggles to move. Minion is way too large for his own home. His pathing is so messed up, the guy actually gets stuck in the ground sometimes. Upon further investigation, Road Rage took the #1 spot for me. With the maze, there's actually a method to the madness. Playing against 7 opponents with Game Shark shows it's not that bad. Road Rage, even with 7 enemies, is still not very fun. The main issue with this level is the fact you have so many sections that just don't even need to be there. Seriously, these outside highway areas, why are they even here? If you removed it, nothing would change. When it comes to level design, there needs to be a flow. All the levels need to have important aspects to them so it never feels like a waste of time when you're driving somewhere. It's a similar moment to the first Twisted Metal with Suburbia. It creates a problem where the AI sometimes just drive around in random corners of the level that no one ever treads in, so players need to go on a fucking Easter Bunny egg hunt trying to find their enemies. This happens a lot on Road Rage. If you go out into the wilderness of random ass roads, there's only a few weapon pickups that don't really add anything to the experience. Thanks for the pickups, but why is this area here again? That's how I feel whenever I'm driving on them. I like the idea 989 was going for, trying to make some Harbor City level grandiose highway thing, just executed so poorly, genuinely being one of the worst times you can have playing Twisted Metal. The saddest part is that we can't have a Minions Maze moment of rear attack exploiting the entire level with ease to get the torture over with as fast as possible. While we technically can exploit with the lightning and a little pathway, it's just not as reliable or as easy. But the fact 7 enemies doesn't fix the size issue on this level shows how unnecessarily large Road Rage is and why people like to stick proximity mines at the end of teleporters to get easy kills on it because no one wants to play this shit. Twisted Metal Black is a game where the levels are probably the weakest aspect of it. Putting it simply, they are all boring, none are truly memorable. People like to say Snowy Roads is the most memorable thing ever, but the only reason people say that is because it's the only level that's not a fucking mud puddle. Most of them aren't really bad, just boring. Similar to Twisted Metal 3, just slightly above that. It's quite easy to pick the worst level in this game, Drive-In Movie. When it comes to this level right here, I don't ever really play on it. Thankfully, we have the choice during tournament mode to either pick Snowy Roads or Drive-In. It's like they knew the level sucked so bad, giving us a chance to avoid it. We have similar issues that we had with Moscow and Twisted Metal 2. We don't really have a way to survive reliably. Weapon drops seem slightly more plentiful in comparison to Moscow, which is a good thing, but the AI's difficulty is amplified much more than Twisted Metal 2 overall, being much more aggressive as we all know. So not having a health bridge makes Drive-In a lot harder than it needs to be for so many people. Health pickups in Twisted Metal Black are very pathetic to say the least, not getting you much of anything to work with unless you pick up maybe 3 or 4 of them. Drive-In doesn't even have that, so you're stuck doing pussy play, waiting for enemies to come to you, since trying to be aggressive yourself can be a death sentence. You're the only target in this game, so dying is bound to happen unless you're overly careful. Drive-In just needed more for players to be able to survive more reliably. Maybe if there was a larger amount of cover spots, health kits spawning in faster. In theory, it could work as a challenge level or for deathmatch like Moscow, but looking at it, it makes sense why people avoid this. If you're playing on hard mode, just forget it. Health pickups give you even less while enemies are even harder to kill, becoming a mindless fuckfest that's honestly just a waste of time rather than feeling like you're playing a video game. Moscow and Drive-In are held in the same vein, just being needlessly difficult for obvious reasons. Just pick snowy roads instead, it's much more fun. Twisted Metal Small Brawl probably has the best map selection in the franchise. Every one of these are more than creative, there's so many little details thrown in. It's a lot of fun to test out different things on them, this being the only Twisted Metal where I've actually taken the time to sit there and look through my surroundings because there's so many details hidden in them. Sadly, we do have one or two that stink. Most people will gravitate towards Gridiron Gore as the worst map by far, which I honestly do not agree with that. Is it shit? Yes, just not the worst. That goes to Now Slaying. How is this tight little movie theater worse than a large football field where you need to drive around aimlessly for a ridiculous amount of time? Well, it's actually very easy. Now Slaying suffers from a very similar issue that Moscow and now Drive-In do, where there's just not enough weapons on it. Offhand, I believe there's like 6 or 7 weapon pickups on the entire thing. There may even be less. Thankfully, we have 2 health pickups here. This level being where you fight the final boss, you'd expect to have more of an arsenal to work with, but we just don't. When you're fighting piecemeal, all of your weapons may have been expended on the previous enemies, and if you get unlucky and you need to battle Darkseid, Hammerhead, Mr. Slam, good luck using anything against the boss because you're not going to have any weapons left. This being amplified on hard mode, weapon spawns are much longer, so the amount of time you need to wait around is disgusting and isn't the sign of a good level. In comparison to other levels in the game, there isn't much creativity here, intrigue, or fun to be had with the environment either. Your experience is dictated entirely on RNG enemy spawns. If you get lucky, sure, Now Slaying will be fine, or if you're playing as Darkseid, the whole game is a joke difficulty-wise. It makes complete sense to argue Gridiron Gore to be in this spot since both levels are just that bad. For me, Now Slaying wins it out. Twisted Metal Head-On doesn't do many things right to me, not the biggest fan in the world, but the levels in totality are probably the strongest aspect aside from the endings. Those are great for Twisted Metal standards. Of course, there needs to be at least one piece of junk, and the main culprit to me is the newly added level to Extra Twisted Edition, Transylvania. When it comes to an actual good level, there must be a great flow. Players need to be able to navigate through it. Understanding every section is actually important. When it comes to bad levels and the developers are expecting someone to play in this lifeless environment with random areas that just don't need to exist, forces me to question, why is this even here? Transylvania has a lot of areas that you can remove entirely with no effect on the experience, which just should never be the case with any level in any game, period. They seem to have a great base with a Dracula-ass castle in the beginning. We have some traps, the ability to go on top, having a fun arena area. Then the rest of the level is just like, what's the point? You guys should have just made a giant castle interior as the stage. Thankfully, we have a deathmatch variant just being inside the castle. Similar to Minions Maze from Twisted Metal 4, if you just let us have 7 opponents to fight at a time, that may allow Transylvania to be a better level, but sadly we cannot do that. We can in Lost though, which makes 0 sense. Sure, Head-On just fucked me more. There is just so much unused space to the point where I think me exploring this level for the video was the first time I ever entered certain sections of this map. The moat and castle would be serviceable enough. The outside space just doesn't need to be here. Twisted Metal 2012 is a weird one when it comes to level design. I kind of cheated here, sitting there playing through them quite a bit, looking around. None of them stood out as really bad or even good for that matter, just quite mediocre. Which is, I guess, a good thing if you look at it. Better to have all middling maps than a mix of shit ones and great ones. Most of them are just very generic in a design style. And also, if you really think about it, are you supposed to judge these by their biggest version or their smallest version? Since 2012 gave the ability for players to choose if you want a medium size or a small size of a map that's really big, which is a really great idea. But I'm not sitting there thinking, oh wow, do you remember that awesome moment on this map like you would with Antarctica from Twisted Metal 2, for example? Or be like, oh, this map is a piece of junk so there's not enough weapons on it. Or this level is too hard because there's no health bridges. These levels just exist. There's not really much else to say aside from that. Possibly other people see it differently with these, and I'm curious if you think a map from 2012 is truly awful. If you really think about it, a lot of the issues people have with 2012 is how large the levels are, but if you really hate that, you can just play on a much smaller one, making it more fun for you, or you can play it on a larger one if you like that. Your game gives you the option for it, which is something the other games didn't do, so if a level really sucks so bad, there's nothing you could do. Like on Road Rage, you can't select a certain section of the map and play on it. You're forced to play on a giant ass map that just sucks. That's why it's really hard to say a certain level from 2012 is actually bad, because if you hate it that much, you can just change it. And with that, it's the worst level from every Twisted Metal game, aside from 2012 being cheated slightly. If you have a list, please share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say about which levels are the worst from every Twisted Metal game.
Wow! Do you want to be a cool person like everyone here? Join the Bonzi Lucky Club today! Thank you to everyone who supports the channel. You are a hero to us all.
Ginaratolini. 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 Ginaratolini.